Alright, so in regards to the wiring for the aftercooler, I actually have mine ran a little bit different than when it came with Viper's harness here. I actually have mine ran to a switch inside the car. That's where this wire here, right, goes. It goes in the cavity here inside the fender, and then it follows the boost hose. It's kind of zip tied together with it, and it goes in through the same grommet you can get to by pulling your fender liner back. There's one rubber grommet which I can show you from the inside of the car, and all you do is poke a hole in it or drill a hole in it and run the boost hose through. So this wire goes to a switch inside the car, and then on the other side of the switch is ran to a hot fuse inside the fuse box on the inside of the car. That allows me to flip the switch and have the aftercooler run whenever I want, regardless if the car is running or not, because I have it ran to a fuse using an ADA circuit on the inside of the car, and the fuse I ran it to is hot even when the car is off with no keys in it. That's the power wire that triggers the relay. This right here, this wire, that's the plus 12 volts I'm pulling straight from the battery. All I had to do was cut a little notch out of the fuse box right here to feed the wire through. You can still put the cover back on very easily. This here is the fuse, and then I mounted the relay right here using this little bolt and nut on the back side. And then from there, the blue wire and the black wire are both grounded to the same exact spot the factory ground location is for your battery. So the blue wire is the negative side of the relay trigger, and the black wire is the negative side from the pump. So from the relay you have a positive power wire going from it down to the pump, and then the black wire is the ground from the pump. And then those two wires run down right here. I have this piece of conduit protecting them. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this relay out now and then feed the wiring back through the car and pull the wiring harness out. Alright, so just another quick look at it. I got the ground undone. The pump has been unplugged, obviously, and I pulled the relay out. So coming out of the relay, you got the blue wire. That is grounded together with these ring terminals. Right where I said the factory ground location is, right where that screw is. I put it back in there so I didn't lose it. So just cross those over top of each other, ground that with that bolt, and then the only other two wires are the two power wires. The larger power wire, the thicker gauge power wire, goes right to the plus 12 volts right there. You can use these existing screws already that are in there. Just pop one out, put it through the ring terminal, and then screw it back in. And then this one goes to the switch I have inside. Alright, so I took the plastic piece cover off here just so you can get a better view of where everything's routed. So this wire that triggers the relay and the boost hose runs between the frame of the car and the fender. So you just pop that out and you run those there. You can pull back the fender liner from the inside of the tire with the tire off and work your way down to that grommet, which I'm going to show you from the inside right now. Alright, so here's the inside of the car. This here's the clutch pedal, and you're looking back beyond this panel here. You can see that rubber grommet back there. That's a factory rubber grommet. I just punched a hole in the middle. As you can see, the boost hose is running straight through the center of it, as well as that red power wire for the relay. The red power wire is ran to a switch right there. It's a toggle switch that even lights up red when you toggle it on. So this here's the switch inside the car. There's a switch behind it to control my LEDs underneath my feet here. But this big switch here. Alright, so this is how this switch works. The terminal all the way on the left here goes to a ground screw right here, pretty much on the back side of that panel. And what that ground screw does is allows the switch to light up when you flick it on. And the center one is the load. So the load, the center wire runs all the way into the engine bay through that grommet on the floor there. And then the first one is the power wire. So the power, this wire is ran right to the ADA circuit right here underneath the fuse box. Alright, so underneath the car here, this is the lead for the power wire that went to the switch for the aftercooler. Just want to show you what fuse I used for the ADA circuit on that one. It's fuse number 28. Now fuse number 28 already had a existing fuse in it, so the ADA circuit allows you to add the existing fuse as well as the fuse for your application for the power wire here. So I'll pull this out now, but I just wanted to show you. I chose fuse number 28 because that one is hot when the car is off and the keys aren't even in the car. You can have that run with power So you can flick the switch on and run the aftercooler without even having keys in the car. So like when I'd run it at the quarter mile, I'd leave the aftercooler on in between passes and not even have to have my keys in the car. Now the existing fuse for number 28 was a 15, so you want to put a 15 on the bottom of the ATA circuit. You want to match the fuse the factory one was. And then for the load for the relay, I chose a 5 amp fuse, just because that's only triggering the relay. It's not actually carrying the load for the motor, so all it does is trigger the relay, so it uses very low amps. So this is how you get to that grommet from the outside. All you got to do is pop some of your fender liner clips out, and you got to bend down on it so you can just get a hand in. And I'll show you where that grommet is. As you can see, there it is. This is the car for reference. Here's your mirror. You're looking at your tire right here. And up in this pocket is the factory grommet. I have the boost hose run through and the red power wire for the relay for the aftercooler. So you can just get in there with your hand and pull them through the grommet. Alright, so there you go. As you can see, the wire's hanging down outside the fender there. I pulled it through the grommet. That's the last thing holding our wiring harness on. So you just pull it out, and then this is your complete aftercooler wiring harness. Alright, so next all we got to do is take the gauges out of the car. I already had the boost hose that ran to the supercharger manifold. I threaded that back all the way through the fender gap right up there. And there was a union I had in between to join two hoses. And so some of it's still hanging inside the fender. All I got to do is go underneath the steering wheel, underneath where the pedals are, and pull the rest of the boost hose through that grommet, and then work on taking the gauge pot out. Alright, so here we are back in the car. Bear with me with the lighting situation. I got a my Craftsman spotlight here because it's the only power I have in the car. So I'm going to work on pulling the gauge pot out and then putting the factory one back in, which I have right here. And in order to get, the only hard part is going to be to get the sensor from the wideband that the wires run all the way across down through here underneath the console all the way back to where the header is, and then they go through the grommet where the factory secondary O2 sensor went. So we got to unwire all of that and put the factory secondary O2 sensor back in the car for this to be completely taken out. And so you're going to want to pull back on this. There's only 4 clips holding it in as opposed to the multi. So I popped all those loose, and you can see the wiring is exposed in here. So there's the clear tube is the boost hose that runs all the way to the gauge. There's your power and ground wire. And then these 2 clips here is one for the power to the AEM wideband, and then the other one goes to the wideband in the header, the sensor wire. So those unplug quite nicely. But this side is hardwired in, so I'm going to have to unplug it underneath and feed the wires out through the top here to pull this gauge pot out. The power wire for both gauges is ran to one wire here to an ATA circuit. I put a 7.5 amp fuse in there, and this plugged in underneath to the fuse box down there in location number 22. And the reason I chose number 22 was there was no fuse there previously, and the number 22 fuse comes on only when the power is sent to the car with the key. When the key clicks to the second ignition position, that's when that fuse gets power. So the gauges only power up when you turn the car on to the second click. So that kind of works like a factory feature. You're not controlling the switches with some kind of ghetto switch or anything. So that worked out very nicely. So if you want to wire your gauges in, use an ATA circuit and put it in location number 22. And I used the exact same ground for the aftercooler and the gauges. I can't show you with the lighting here, but there's a little Phillips head screw right underneath my finger here. This is the leftmost side of the car, as you can see. We're looking right here. You just back out that Phillips head screw and then put your ring terminals around that Phillips head screw because it grounds right to the metal frame in the dashboard here. So that's a perfect location. It's almost like it was there from the factory, knowing people would put gauges and accessories in their car to ground them easily, because it really worked out perfect. Super clean setup. Alright, so the accelerate gauge pod is out here, as you can see. The only thing I had to do was cut the 2 wires to the power because I can't feed the whole harness up through that small cavity. So these have to be shrink tubed when it's up in the car, up on the dashboard there. So just be careful when you're doing that. But those are the only 2 wires I had to cut to get the whole thing out. The back of it looks like this. To mount it to the dashboard, all you got to do is reuse 4 of the plastic clips that come off your stock one, and you have plenty to spare once you take your stock piece off. So the locations are there, And right here, I must have lost one because it must have shot inside the dashboard when I pulled this thing off, so I got to look for that. And then the fourth one is on the end over here, so that gives it pretty good retention into the dashboard, and it doesn't really vibrate around or move around or anything. Mine fit very, very well in my car. No complaints with that. It was my favorite part about the interior. Alright, so the red wire is the power wire and the green is the ground for the innovative boost gauge, obviously. So those are the only two wires that are still fed up through the car. They pretty much follow my finger and go behind the vent and then around here. I think it might be easier if you take this plastic piece with this little vent on the quarter window here out, and you can see them a lot easier and help feed them all through to get up to this point, and then you just route them behind this plastic shroud there, and then there's plenty of room behind there to make it nice and clean routing. So I'm just going to pull the rest of these straight through. And the wires are all out of the car. So the last thing in the car related to the gauges is this wire here that I have pretty intensely routed through behind the pedal, the gas pedal there, and it feeds underneath the whole center console here. So I got to pull the whole center console up and get to the wideband. I got to jack up the car and undo the sensor from the header and remove everything. And to start, there's two clips with this plastic center console way back on each side. You got to pop those out. They're the same clips that hold your bumper on underneath in the front. And then work on pulling the plastics up. Pull this up, and you'll be able to pop this up. I believe it's just clips that pop everything up. And then you got to go inside your center console and take the screws out underneath the fabric on the bottom, and then just work on pulling the whole center console up here, and that'll allow access to your wire easily. Alright, so this side you got to drop down your little vent there under your passenger feet, and that allows access to the clip right there to pop out, which allows you to take your center console and pull it straight back. You got to take the shift knob off, you got to take that silver piece, pop that straight up. You got to pop the black plastic piece that the silver piece pops into, pull that straight up. There might be a couple Phillips head screws holding that in, and then take the Phillips head screws out of the bottom of the center console. You should be able to see pretty clearly at that point what else is needed to take it and pull it backwards. So once you get this far, there's two Phillips head screws that go in there, and then they mount these two pieces together right there. You got to take those out. Everything else just pops straight up to get to this point. I took the two back here at the bottom of there. There's two screws down there. I took those out, so the whole thing's loose. But when you go to pull back on it, you're going to feel something fighting you. And what that is this white sensor down there. You want to reach from the front of that and unclip that before you yank too hard, because you don't want to pull the pins out of the connector there. So make sure you undo that, and then you should be able to, this whole thing is completely loose now. Alright, so once you get your center console out, you got a ton of room here. This is kind of what it looks like with it out. You got that's a support for the center on the bottom to mount to. And that white connector I was talking about earlier, that goes to your cigarette outlet inside your center console. So that's what that wire was for. Make sure not to damage really your parking brake sensor here. But this black plug, let me see if I can get better lighting for you. That black plug right there, there's nothing plugged into it currently because that's where the secondary O2 sensor from the factory plugs in. And then right in front of it, that's the grommet that goes underneath the car. And currently, I have that ran with the AEM kind of fitting, and I put some zip ties around it so it would seal and stuff, and I put some like silicone sealant in between the wire and the grommet, and that's the factory grommet. I just bored a hole through the center of it. So you can follow the wire, comes out of the underneath of the car, and underneath the car it goes into the header, and then it follows underneath that piece, and you can see the black wire goes up through there, wraps around, and then obviously comes out over here. So that's kind of the routing I did with it, and just for reference, it's right next to your, pretty much the front of your seat when you're reclined all the way back, is the grommet for the O2 sensor. Alright, so this is going to be kind of hard to see. I'm kind of laying underneath the car here. Primary O2 sensor is way up there on the NVIDIA header. Secondary is right here. That's where my AEM wideband ran to. As you see here, that's the factory little clip mount for the factory secondary O2 sensor, so I kind of utilize that even though it doesn't snap in very well. And then right here is where the two connectors join. I have my contraption of zip ties holding it tight to there, and this is the factory mount as well for the factory O2 sensor. And then right above that is the grommet that I just showed you from the inside. So I have it ran to that, zip tied and held there. It's just routed nicely through that connector and then right to the header. So that's pretty much it. That's how you set up the AEM wideband. So all I'm going to do is unclip this now, then feed that through and pull it out from the top, and then undo the sensor and then pull that out of the header. Alright, so this is the factory AEM wideband sensor. Still works perfectly. And then that's the quick disconnect for it. Be putting this right back in the AEM box. Alright, so this is the AEM sensor from the inside. I pulled up on the grommet. Right there's the shift assembly. The connector's too big to fit through that little hole in the frame, so what you got to do is feed the smaller end up first through the bottom of the car when you put this thing in. So this is a lot smaller than the other connector, so just feed this out through the bottom of the car, and then that is the remainder of all the wiring.